Welcome to the webinar, Responding to Questions from the Audience. And good morning to those people in West Australia and good afternoon to those people on the Eastern Seaboard. Responding to questions from the audience is one of the most effective skills you ever have. And it's one of those things that can cause people concern and problems in terms of presentations and general public speaking. You may do a wonderful presentation, you may be confident, you may know your topic really well, and then when you open up to that question and that answer session, the difficult questions, the angry people that ask you contentious questions or complex, multifaceted questions, and as you, the presenter, as you, the public speaker, as you, the trainer, struggle answering those questions because you weren't expecting it, your credibility in the eyes of the audience just drops that little bit. So responding to questions, whether you're a presenter, a keynote speaker, a trainer, responding to questions is a key skill and will help you be more effective and more confident when you speak. This webinar, Responding to Questions from the Audience, dovetails in with last week's webinar on thinking and speaking off the cuff. So what I say today really adds layers on to what I said last week about thinking and speaking off the cuff. If any of you on this webinar were not able to attend last week's webinar on thinking and speaking off the cuff, do send me an email because I have a recording of last week's webinar, Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff, and I could quite easily send you that webinar. So responding to questions, and a few more people just joining as we speak. So Peter Dew is my name, and I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and I just love to help people find their voice, find the confidence, find the skill to effectively get your message, your point of view across so you can have your say, you can influence meetings, society, your workplace the way you want to. Public speaking is mankind's number one fear, and many people would rather avoid public speaking. So this webinar, How to Respond to Questions from the Audience, is just one of those little tools in your toolkit that will help you be both more confident because you'll know how to handle those difficult questions. You'll know what to do when you get into that question part of your seminar or workshop, and it'll make you more effective because your responses will be targeted, they'll be efficient, and they'll have the answers that the audience are looking for. My contact details are there. I'm always interested in feedback, and if I can be of any assistance with further webinars with further topics. What I'm going to cover today, I've already outlined the brief introduction, the importance of being able to respond to questions from your audience, and that audience could be the job interview panel, could be the seminar, could be the training workshop, it could be the facilitation or the brainstorming session that you're running. Really important. I'm then going to give you some general tips for questions and answers. I'm going to teach you an Eloquent model for responding to questions, kind of a standard model that you can roll out and adapt every time you are in that Q&A session. I'm going to talk to you about the bucket model, which is another tool that fits in with all that I'm going to teach you around questions. It's not the bucket list, it's the bucket model that you have for responding to questions, and some strategies to follow if you don't know the answer to the questions. They're the things I want to cover in the webinar. Just taking a step back, please ask questions as we go. Two ways of asking questions: raise your hand and I will open up your microphone, or if you're on the telephone, I'll open up the telephone. The second way is you can raise your hand, and by raising your hand, you can then, when you raise your hand, I'll open up your microphone, or you can type directly into the question box and that will appear on my screen, and then I can pause and respond to that question. So ask questions as we go, but also there's times within the webinar, within the 1 hour, that I will pause and ask, are there any questions at this stage? But don't wait for those pauses. Don't wait for those scheduled stops if something surfaces that you want answered straight away. Questions make the webinars a lot more interactive. If you don't ask any questions, we could possibly finish early. I guess as with thinking and speaking off the cuff, there's a couple of things that are really important. And if you have these, they'll help you be more confident. The first one is structure, and that's the Eloquent model and the bucket model. So I'm going to give you some structures that you can use to respond to questions. The other thing that will really hold you in good stead is, of course, your preparation. You can really anticipate the types of questions that you could be asked. And if you're speaking on something contentious, if you're delivering bad news, if you're going to downsize the organisation, if you're going to shed staff, if you're going to reduce budget, if you're going to move people from one department to another, be prepared. You can anticipate those contentious, those angry, those left field questions. If someone was to ask you a question, or what question would you not want to be asked in your presentation? What question would really make you squirm, or would you find very uncomfortable to answer? Think of that question and have an answer for it, because sure enough, that question that you really would be quite difficult is the question that people will ask you. So it's anticipating the difficult, the left field, the contentious, the angry questions that might come your way, and have an answer scripted for that question. In my public speaking workshops, I say that before you speak to an audience, you need to walk 30 moons in their moccasins. This is a North American Indian saying. Before you can understand your enemy, you need to walk 30 moons in their moccasins. How can you work out what questions you're going to be asked? Put yourself in your audience's shoes. If you were in the audience and you're receiving that news or that message that you as the speaker were delivering, how would you react? How would you feel? What questions would you want to know? So do your preparation and anticipate the questions. So let's start with preparation. Some general tips around preparation. Preparation is key. I mentioned a quote last week from Robert Schuller, prior preparation. Spectacular performance is always preceded by spectacular preparation. Spectacular performance is always preceded by spectacular preparation. The other one is prior preparation prevents pathetically poor performance in relation to responding to questions. So do your preparation, as I said, walk in their shoes, anticipate those tricky questions. What question would make you feel uncomfortable? Have an answer for it. The second thing in terms of preparation, and what you can do as a general tip, is at the front of your workshop, at the front of your 30-minute keynote, set the rules around your questions. With this webinar, I've let you know the rules around questions. Please ask questions as we go. You can raise your hand and I'll open your microphone, or you can type a question into the dialog box. I'm also going to pause periodically during the webinar and allow you time for questions. That's my rules for this 1 hour webinar. Set your own rules. I'm happy to take questions as we go, So in my seminar, please put your hand and ask a question. Or I've got 20 minutes with you. I'm going to speak for 15 minutes, then I'm going to leave questions to the end for 3 to 5 minutes. So can I ask all of you to hold your questions to the end? If I open up for questions straight away, I won't be able to get through my content. It's your gig, your speaking, your training. You set the rules and get agreement. Is everyone okay if I ask you to hold your questions to the end? Look at the nod, get the verbal agreement. And then when someone tries to interrupt, unless it's a fire alarm going off or some emergency, you can sort of politely say, look, as we agreed, I'd like you to ask the question up front. Another thing you can do is when you are speaking on a contentious issue, you might say, I know there's going to be a lot of questions because what I'm speaking about is quite contentious, is quite new, is quite innovative, and there'll be a lot of questions. Can I make a rule that 1 question per person? That way I'll be able to cover as many questions as possible. And if you've got additional questions after that, please email me or come and see me at the morning tea break. Is everyone cool with that? Okay, let's move on. So when Fred, who's angry, asks you the first question and then comes back at you a minute later with a second question, you have permission from the audience, from the way you set the rules, to say, look, Fred, if you don't mind, can you please hold that question? We've already covered 1 question. I want to give other people the chance for questions. Please come and see me at the morning tea break or email me your questions. You've given yourself, or you've set the rules in how you're going to behave and deal with questions. Now, that doesn't, if you do set that rule, 1 question per person, that doesn't give you the right to shut Fred down with the first question, to disrespectfully kind of ignore his question and then now think, okay, I've done with Fred, because the audience will realise you haven't answered his question. So you must genuinely answer Fred's first question, and what happens is the second question from Fred shows you that really he's more of a heckler, more of an angry person than wanting genuine questions. You've answered his first question properly, comprehensively. You've set the rules of 1 question per person, but Fred is coming back for a second bite of the cherry. You've got the right to say, if you don't mind, Fred, can you hold that question until the morning tea break, and I'll speak to you then. Can I now move on to the other questions in the room? Set the rules up front. It'll make it a lot easier for you. You'll have been able to frame, control those difficult questions, and you'll know, and the audience will know, how the question and answer session is going to unfold. Anticipate those tricky or those angry questions. This is part of your preparation. You're reducing budget. You're closing down 1 department, merging 3 departments into 2, and you're doing the change management presentation. You know what questions you're going to be asked. Don't be surprised when someone throws that awkward, that curly curveball question at you. This is about anticipation. This is about putting yourself in the audience's footsteps. So have a bank of common questions. Sometimes when you go to websites, you have frequently asked questions, and the questions you get asked all the time, you will know what they are, and you'll have those answers that will roll off the tongue both confidently and effectively. If you work in a team, someone else might get a question that they are unaware of, then you need to add it to your bank of questions and share it with other people. If you're in the financial planning team and you go out and do talks on the advantage of financial planning, and there's a team of you, and one person gets a tricky question that they did not anticipate and is not in their bank of frequently asked questions, they need to then add that question, but also share it with other people. Or the other way around that, of course, if you get that tricky question that's not in your bank, when you get back into the office, or as soon as you can say to your colleagues, look, I received this question the other day, last night, this afternoon at lunch, at that lunchtime seminar. I don't think I handled it very well. How would you deal with that question? So draw on the knowledge, the expertise of other people, and that does two things for you. Number one, it adds that question to your frequently asked question. It also informs the other people that that question is out there so that they won't be in the same situation that you've just found yourself in. And then you add that new question to your bank. Every time you get new questions, things change, superannuation rules change, legislation changes. You need to add new questions to your bank. Sometimes with my workshops, I do a pre-workshop questionnaire. If you could walk away with 2 or 3 magic bits of information that would help you be more confident and more effective in your public speaking as a result of my workshop. So if I could leave you with 2 or 3 magic nuggets that would help you with your public speaking, what would they be? 90% of the time my responses are the same things. What do I do how can I control nerves? What do I do if my mind goes blank? How can I speak without notes? What do I do with my hands and my body language? How should I use PowerPoint to be more effective? I've got those, but every now and then there's a question that I'm unfamiliar with or I don't have in my bank, and so I add that to my bank of questions. Don't end with questions. Don't end your seminar or your workshop with questions. What I want you to do is, you've set the rules. I want you to hold the questions to the end or take questions as we go. But what I want you to do is the last 2 minutes to 30 seconds, whatever you need, to take the floor back, to take the microphone back from the MC, from the chairman, or maybe there is no MC or chairman and you're running your own show, but to end the questions and then sum up with your key take-home message. Sum up with your call to action, the whole purpose of your presentation. Sum up with that. If you don't, and you do end with questions, if you get a tricky question that comes at the end of your presentation that you don't answer well, that you struggle to answer, and then the time is up, then that tricky question becomes your takeaway message that the audience walks away with. And your credibility may go down a little bit. So you've spoken really well. That's the end of my presentation. I'm now going to open up with questions now. Are there any questions? Fred asked that difficult question. You struggle to answer it. Everyone else in the room's listening and saying, well, maybe Peter doesn't know as much about this topic as I thought he did. Maybe that's a good question that Fred's asked. I never thought of that. Maybe Peter's not across the issue fully and my credibility's just gone down. So after answering questions, whether it's tricky or not, okay, I'm now going to stop questions there. Now remember, if you only do one thing today, go home and incorporate this new health and safety policy into your workplace to ensure that we can do zero harm, or whatever your take-home message is. You need to step back, finish the questions, and nail your take-home message. I'm going to pause for a moment and just have a drink of water. Please put your hand up or type in any questions at this stage. How many people do prepare and anticipate questions before they go and present or go to a seminar? Are there any other things you could do that would help you prepare for your question session? Interested in your comments. And yes, I've got one comment around knowing if you're going to an organisation, certainly know that organisation's values and their mission, so that in answering questions you don't, your responses are consistent with their values and with their mission and with their vision, as opposed to your answer might be completely correct, but if it is in any way in contrast or not in line with that organisation's values, then your response may not receive the same impact as if you answer the question, but also make sure you're in line with the values. And it's about walking in your audience's footsteps and doing some research. Google, if you are invited to speak to an organisation, what is their mission and their vision? What is the values of that organisation? Are there any cultural things you need to be aware of? When I do one of my icebreakers in my introductory public speaking workshops, one of my icebreakers is, tell me a little bit about yourself, tell me a little bit about your work, and tell me a little bit about your growing up and your family. I can't ask that question if I have any Noongars, West Australian Aboriginals, in my workshop. They don't like to talk about themselves, and they don't identify themselves in that way. They identify themselves by where they come from and their family. So I need to ask a different question for that group of people. I need to know that beforehand. So it's about your preparation in terms of being aware of the values, the mission, the vision of the organisation, and so your response can also be culturally appropriate. I think we've seen some responses on television from our politicians recently. Questions might have been quite eloquently answered, but were culturally offensive to some groups of the population. Big mistake. Okay, no more questions, no more comments, no other ideas of how we might prepare to help us with our Q&A session. I want to share with you and give you an example of an Eloquent model of how to answer questions. This is mostly with a group of people, with an audience, but you can adapt this model to suit yourself. If you wanted to Google models for responding to questions, you'll get a range of different models. This is one that I like. This is one that I think is quite eloquent and works fairly well. The first thing is repeat the question. So you're in front of a room of people, you're delivering a seminar, you're now in your Q&A session, or someone's asked a question in the middle of the session, which you've allowed. Repeat the question. Those of you who attended last week's webinar will remember, thinking and speaking off the cuff, one of the first things to do is to resist time pressure. That is, don't say your answer or the first thing that comes into your mind. And one of the ways of resisting time pressure is to repeat the question. So repeating the question serves three purposes. Number one, it buys you a little bit of time. So if I understand you correctly, you've asked me what's my point of view on the future of nuclear energy in Australia. In saying that, I'm buying myself some time. The second reason for repeating the question is as you look and make eye contact with the person asking you the question, you can look at their response. If their head nods up and down in agreement, you've heard the question right. If their head goes side to side in that no way or that no gesture, you understand you've misinterpreted the question. And you can say, if I understand you right, no. Okay, can you repeat the question, please? So it's checking in with the person who asked the question that you've got the question right. That's the second reason for repeating the question. The third reason is if you've ever been in a bigger seminar where the speaker's up the front and they have a microphone and that's the only way their voice is going to reach the whole room. Someone down the front asks a question that you down the back or in the middle of the room don't hear, and the speaker answers the question. Look, I'd have to totally disagree with that, and I would suggest that that's not a good idea at all. But hang on, guys, we didn't hear the question. What was the question that you just answered? I've seen that happen so many times where the person goes into the response, they're very passionate, they're very deliberate, they probably answer the question superbly, but I've got no idea what the question was. So that's the third reason for repeating the question. It ensures that everyone in the audience is clear on what the question was. And if in repeating it you just paraphrase it or change it a little bit to seek clarity, that'll once again make sure the audience understands the concept and the scope of the question. The asker nodding back at you reconfirms that, and you've bought yourself a little bit of time. Don't use repeating the question as a way of changing the intent of the question. Our politicians do that sometimes, and it's part of their media training. They will deflect the question, not answer it, and move back to what they want to say. And to the audience, especially on television, they've clearly skirted around, skipped or ignored the question. As a speaker, a trainer, a presenter, as an educator, you need to answer those questions. So don't skip around it. Don't, in repeating the question, change the intent or the context of the question to suit yourself. If you're going to paraphrase it, paraphrase purely to seek understanding and that you're fully across the question, especially those double, triple barrel questions. So if I understand you correctly, you've asked me, when have I used my interpersonal skills to resolve conflict? And I didn't get the positive outcome that I wanted. And also, what would I do differently the next time if I had the same sort of conflict? Because that's a triple barrel question. And you can use that at job interview. The second part in this model is, it's called creating relevance for the whole audience, or briefly termed chunking it up. If someone does ask a left field or a contentious or a very narrow specific question and you answer directly just back to that person, and the rest of the room, the rest of the audience may wonder, well, why do I need to know? Or why do I care? Or so why does that apply to me? So in answering that question, you need to make it relevant to everyone in the room, because one of the mistakes that people do in question and answer sessions is they respond purely and solely to the person who asked the question. So the other 20 people in the room think, well, he's not talking to us anymore. And we'll talk about that later on with the eye contact. So let me give you an example. My background's in medical science, so I'm going to pick a really obscure topic that some of you may have no interest in whatsoever. So I'm going to start here. So Colleen, that's a really great question. Colleen's just asked me, what's my view on the new DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing juvenile diabetes? It's a really great question. And I'm sure that all of you on this webinar, all of you in the room would agree, anything that helps our children in Australia have early detection of diabetes that allows them to go on and live normal, healthy lives with their diabetes, anything that helps us achieve that would be a valuable tool. Now I'm going to answer the question. So Colleen, I think the medical research is a little bit early to say that it's an absolute winner. I think we need to have a watching brief, but it's certainly looking promising. That was my effort to chunk it up so all of you think, well, yeah, if it's going to help our children or our grandchildren that, you know, might be diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, that would be good. This is the true art of answering questions, making it relevant to everyone in the room. And of course, all of you might use these models at some stage in your life. Chunk it up. All of you in the room would probably be interested in how you could make an extra 5% on your superannuation. I'm sure all of us would like to maximise our superannuation. What's my view on deferred annuities? And then I go into answer the specific question. Is everybody clear on that? It's going up to the helicopter view. Once again, you know your whole audience, so why would the audience want to know something about this? Then you drill down and answer the specific question, which may be niche. There might be someone in the room who's read a fantastic journal article that no one else knows about. Chunk it up, make it relevant. Be concise. This is the keep it simple principle. Some people with their question and answers become really long-winded, and after answering the question they just go on. They just go on and they go on. Try and be concise. So this is the next step, and this will hold you well in job interviews as well. Creating relevance, chunking it up in a job interview is probably not required because you've only got 2 or maybe 3 or 4 people on the interview panel. It's relevant to all of them. You're demonstrating your ability to do a selection criteria or your ability to do the job. So this step you could probably leave out of a job interview. This step I wouldn't. I would repeat the question in the job interview because it's going to help me clarify my mind and make sure I understand those double or triple barrel questions. I would not repeat the question at a team meeting, a board meeting, 4 or 5 people around the room, and someone to the left of you or the chairman asks you your view on something. To repeat the question then in such a small audience may seem silly. Doesn't seem silly in the job interview, but it does make sense to make it relevant to everyone in the room. You might have HR, finance, and operations. And the general manager might ask you, well, what's your view on shedding $100,000 in this particular area to bring the department or the organisation back on budget? You can chunk it up by making it relevant. So this is going to have impact on HR, this is going to have impact on our marketing, and this is going to have impact on our recruitment. And logistically, we're going to have to change our operations. My view is that I don't think we should cut the budget by $100,000, our service delivery and so on. So you can create relevance so that if the finance guy asks you a finance question in a meeting and the rest of the people in the meeting don't give a damn, or it's not relevant to them, or they don't understand why they need to listen, you can have that one-on-one conversation because you're going to lose the audience anyhow. If it's not relevant for them, you're going to lose the other members at the meeting, at the seminar, at the conference. Create relevance for everyone. Be concise. Eye contact with everyone. I briefly alerted to one of the common mistakes with Q&A sessions at a seminar or a workshop. Eye contact only with the person who's asked the question. Big mistake. Job interview, 3 people in the interview panel, they take it in turns asking questions and you speak only to the person who asks you the question, big mistake. So make eye contact, first of all, with the person who is asking you the question. Make eye contact to receive, and then as you paraphrase or repeat the question back, make eye contact. Then you'll see the nod or the shake of the head. Then make eye contact with everyone in the room in the normal public speaking way. Engage the front part of the room, the back part of the room, the middle of the room, the left, the right. Speak to one person at a time in the room as you're unpacking your answer. Then when you've finished, you bring your eye contact back to the person who asked the question. You summarize the answer. So I think it's too early to say the DNA nanotechnology is going to be a success. And thank you for your question. Generally, I don't say, does that answer your question? If you say, does that answer your question, you're now inviting the person to come back and have a second bite of the cherry, and all of a sudden he may come back with a second part of the question, and this Q&A, this seminar has now deteriorated into a two-way conversation, and you lose the rest of the audience. So eye contact first with the person who asks you the question. Then answer the question. Be concise. Eye contact with everyone in the room evenly as you have done in your presentation. Summarize. As you're summarizing, you summarize. Your eye contact can be with everyone, and then back to the answer of the question, the asker of the question, and you say, and thanks for your question, as opposed to, does that answer your question? Now, be careful with this. This is in a forum that you want to have control, and you've set the rules for questions up front. Let us say you are facilitating, or you are in a brainstorming exercise and you are the chairperson or the trainer in a brainstorming. You don't want to shut your questions down. You don't want to shut the conversation down. So rather than say, thank you for your question, you might say, is there anything else you can add? Are there any more comments or questions around that? The thank you for your question and letting the person know that you've finished with their question is more in a formal seminar, when you want to let them know that you've ended the question and you want to give other people chances to ask you questions. So thanks for your question. Are there any other questions in the room? As opposed to, does that answer your question, when you know he's going to come back at you and all of a sudden you've deteriorated into a two-way conversation. So that's quite an eloquent model. You can adapt it for job interviews, for around the boardroom table, for seminars, or for brainstorming or facilitation type things. Quite an adaptable model. Any questions? Okay. The next model that you can use to layer on top of this model, it's called the bucket model. And the bucket model was made famous by Henry Kissinger. Steve Jobs used it, and other confident speakers use the bucket model when they come back to their question session. What it simply means is, think of all the common questions that you get answered, and there might be hundreds of them. What you'll notice is that there'll be 10, 20, 30 ways of asking the same question. And in the questions there'll be a key theme, a key word that triggers your attention, grabs your ear, that this question is about price. But isn't this expensive? Well, how much is this going to cost us? But our competitors are even cheaper. Quality. Logistics. And what you do is you create a bucket, a prepared answer that sits in that bucket, so that whenever anyone brings out a word around quality, price, logistics, marketing, you have that answer prepared. So what Henry Kissinger used to say is, to himself, not out loud, and this is in writing if you want to Google it, what questions do you have for my answers? Most people go into a Q&A session with the mentality, so what answers can I pull out? What answers have I got for your questions? And they try and create an answer for every question. This is the other way. This is reversing the mentality and thinking, so what questions have you got for my answers? I've got all my answers, they're all here. Whatever question you've got is going to fit into one of the buckets. And that is the answer I'm going to pull out, because I recognise you're really worried about quality. That's the bucket model. With my earlier remarks around preparation, one of the things I said was build your bank of stories. So every now and then you'll get something that comes, that a question that's new, maybe legislation's changing, maybe superannuation rules changing, financial investment advice is changing, the world is changing. So maybe you get a really good legitimate question that you don't have an answer for. You need to create a new bucket. You need to create a new bucket. So you only ever get caught out on that question that you don't have the answer once. And this is a question you should have the answer. This is not a question that is outside of scope or outside of your expertise. This is a question that's very appropriate, well asked, and you don't have a good answer. You need to store that and create a new bucket. And if you work in a team, as I said, a team of trainers or a team of marketers, then share that knowledge. I got asked a question the other day on such and such. I don't think I answered it very well. If you were asked that question, how would you answer it? And then build the buckets for the team. Maybe you've got colleagues in another state that work in the same area. Have you ever been asked this question? You could ask them. And how would you respond to it? And it's about building your buckets. I used to work in the area of organ donation and transplantation for 8 years. And I used to do 2 to 3 presentations per day. High schools, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, Apex clubs, any organisation that wanted someone to come in and speak on organ donation and transplantation. Once at a high school, a guy asked me a really interesting question. He said, Peter, you talk about liver transplants and the ability to split the adult liver. There's the small lobe and the big lobe. The ability to split the adult liver into 2 and give the small lobe to a 12-month, 18-month-old child that's born with a disease where their liver doesn't function, and the other larger lobe can go into an adult. So, Peter, you're about 50 years old. How's your liver going to survive in that 12-month-old child? And will he need a new liver later on in life because your liver's already 50 years old? And as you've said to us, you do drink wine and beer every now and then. It was a brilliant question, and I didn't know the answer. So my response was that I had to get back to him, and I went and contacted one of the liver transplant surgeons, and what he said was that my liver is cleansed, revitalised, and will grow as that 12-month-old child grows into an adult, and will serve that child for the rest of his life as long as there's no rejection problems or no infection problems. That liver, even though it's already 50 years old, will grow, be replenished, and that is I guess that's the beauty of the liver. I had to put on a new bucket. I shared that with other people within the health department because they also spoke on organ donation. So all of a sudden we added another bucket. The bucket model. You get all these questions all the time. You know what they are. Put them into groups and come out with I'm hoping everyone's still there. I have just had a problem, a runtime error on my computer, and I do not know. Yes, your screen pausing has halted. Are there any questions at this stage on the bucket model or the model that I showed you before? And I'm hoping that you can still hear me. Can someone put their hand up if you can hear me? So Karen, yes, you can hear me. Glenn, you can hear me. Good. Colleen, you can hear me. My screen has just gone dead and my computer has died. So that's the bucket model. That's the bucket model. And I cannot change the audience view. Okay. I was pausing for questions. The next bit was what to do if you don't know. So you're going to have to listen to me rather than see my screen. And I'm hoping the recording will still record the video. If not, I have another recording that I can send you. So what do you do if you don't know how to answer the question? What can you do? First thing is, this is not the time to bluff or to make it up. You don't fake it till you make it in question time. People will have their iPads, their iPhones with you. If you give false data, if you make up answers, if you say something that's not technically right, then they may know. They may even search the answer there and then. So be prepared to honestly say, I don't know the answer. Don't bluff. What you can do, as I did with the liver transplant, agree to find out. That's a really great question. I don't know what the answer is. Let me find out and get back to you. Now, of course, with that young boy in the high school, there's no point in me getting back to him because everyone else in the room heard the question. So I need to get back to everyone. So I found out the answer and I got back to their school teacher, who then in class said, oh, I've just had a response from Peter. You know that question that Fred asked about liver transplant? Well, the response is that that lobe will grow, mature, multiply, be cleansed, be revitalized, and do that child for the rest of their life. You need to get back to everyone. That's a really great question. Let me find out and let me get back to all of you. I've got all of your emails, so I'm going to send the question that Fred's asked and the response to everyone. If you're in a seminar, that's a really great question. I don't know, but I'm going to find out and I'm going to put it on my website. I'm going to put Fred's question and my answer on my website. I'm going to leave it there for a couple of weeks. Remember, our politicians take questions on notice. So do agree to find out. Now, I can't even see the rest of my screen. Okay, yes I can. Ask a colleague in the audience. So that's a really good question. I've just been asked my view on DNA nanotechnology in diagnosing juvenile diabetes. I haven't read that journal article, but I've got my friend Fred, who's sitting in the front of the audience. Fred, do you know the answer to that question? I notice Bill's down the back. Bill's are specialised in juvenile endocrinology. Jim, do you have the answer for that? Ask a colleague in the audience. Phone a friend. Next thing you can do is hey, I'm back. I'm hoping you're seeing that screen now. Ask anyone in the audience. One of the things that I teach in my public speaking is come across really humble. It'll help you connect and build rapport. Even if you are the guru, if you are the expert, I always assume that someone in the room will know more than me on some aspects of what I'm speaking, and maybe someone will know more than me on everything I'm speaking. And that can be quite daunting. But if you go in with the attitude that the collective wisdom of the room is greater than yours, and ask anyone in the room, that's a really great question. I've never considered it before. Is there anyone else in the room who can answer that question, who has read that article, who could contribute to our understanding of that topic? So ask anyone in the audience. Bearing in mind you've set the rules up front. If you're running out of time, you can't do that. So you're going to agree to find out and get back to them. The question may be out of scope, and this is part of setting the rules up front. So you can set the scope. I'm here today to talk about the financial implications and the budget of this new project. What I can't talk about is the logistics and the operational rollout. If there's any questions around that, I'll have to defer you to the engineering department within the City of Perth. I'm here to talk about the budget and the financial implications. I've set the scope. So if people ask me questions, I can say, look, as I said in my introduction, I'm not going to talk about logistics. That's outside of the scope. Feel free to contact engineering. You have a right to let the audience know what you will talk about and what you won't talk about. Another thing to be aware of is if you keep getting questions that are outside of your expertise, outside of your scope, what is it that's going wrong that is bringing that audience to you, expecting you to speak on this topic, and that's not what you're talking about? You'd need to review your marketing material. Who's marketing you? If you came today wanting to know how to respond to questions from the audience while growing rich in your sleep, and you're asking me questions about how am I going to grow rich, I would have to understand that I've made a mistake on my marketing material, or someone said, yeah, Peter's really good at helping you get rich, which I'm not. So if you get questions out of scope, something's gone wrong. What is it that the audience has led the audience to believe that in coming to your webinar, your seminar, your presentation, they're going to get this information which is not what you talk about? So that's a good sign that you need to tighten up your marketing, make the audience expectations clearer, and you can set that up front in your marketing material and in your opening. I will talk about this, but I will not talk about that. The last thing is follow up and get back to them. If you're going to agree to find out, do follow up and get back to them. If you don't follow up, if you say I'll find out and you don't get back to them, then you're going to lose credibility, the rapport and the trust, because you're not doing what you said. This is how I normally end my webinars. I'll leave this with you. From what you've learnt today with Q&A, those models, how to prepare, what to do if you don't know the answer, you write down the 6 things that work best for you, select 2 of them, practice them for a couple of months, and then choose another 2. Please don't take all 6 across. It'll be information overload. It was Albert Einstein who said, insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different outcome. You're on this webinar because the next time that you respond to questions, you want to be more effective. Focus on 2. practice them for 3 months, then you can choose another 2. I've got some workshops in Perth. It's gone slightly over time, so we'll wrap up now. 4th of December, that's next Tuesday, Winning Presentation Skills. It's on my website. Wednesday, Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff. Saturday, the 8th of December, I'm running the last Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway workshop. That's under license with Dr. Susan Jeffers. If I can be of any assistance in the future, please contact me via the website, and any further questions, I'd be quite happy to take them via email. Next time you get before an audience, put some of these models to answer your questions both confidently and effectively, so you give the audience what they want. Thanks for your attention.